Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having a great day today. Today we're taking a look at the book, The Champion of Garathorm. It was written by Michael Moorcock. It's in the Eternal Champion series. It is the next book in the Castle of Brass trilogy, which takes a look at my favorite Eternal Champion, Dorian Hawkmoon, after his 4-book series, which I normally give people to start off reading the Eternal Champion series. It seems a little bit easier, I think, to get into some of his other stuff. Michael Moorcock used to be my favorite writer, so I've been going back and rereading a few things here and there. For you folks, I just finished reading the 6-book Colearm series, and this is the second book of the trilogy. And since the first book is in a 4-book quartology, this is then the 6th book in the series, not the 5th book that you might normally think from the second series. Trilogy like this. The Champion of Garathorm is a play on names. It is taking our Eternal Champion, Dorian Hawkmoon, and moving him to another place where he's going to play the part of the Eternal Champion. And the Eternal Champion series, in this case, is a multiverse of planes, and that concept was created, and that name was created by Michael Moorcock for you folks. And then each of these has a central conflict between law and chaos. And the Eternal Champion is a character who exists on all of these different planes and fights the good fight for law against chaos. And so that's what's happening in all these different contexts and concepts and so forth. So what's happening basically is that now we're doing this in a future world of Earth that has been destroyed and has science in a post-apocalyptic science fantasy, if you will, which is pretty fun. It has a lot of changes to things like words and so forth are slightly changed from Great Britain to Grand Breton is the name of the empire that's evil, and so forth. And it's a lot of fun things in there like that. So it's cool. I enjoy it, and it's pretty fun, and I like the sequel too. So what's basically happening in this novel rather, and again, I keep my reviews spoiler free, but I'm going to have to tell you what happens at the end of the previous novel briefly in order to set up this novel. So I'm spoiling the end of the previous novel for you folks in case you've never heard of it before, but you have to in order to tell you what happens at the beginning. But normally what I do in my spoilers, as a reminder, for spoiler reasons, I tell you what happens in the first couple chapters of a novel, or first couple pages of a short story to set it up and so forth. So there is going to be light spoilers as to the ending of the previous novel that I just went back and reread, called Count Brass, for you folks. So what's happening at the end of that is that Count Brass comes back. We find out that Count Brass is alive, but he's like 20 years younger. And so forth. At the beginning of the book, he's trying to kill Dorian Hawkmoon, but he's an earlier version. Everybody thinks he's a ghost, but in fact, he's actually just been taken from Ton. And so Dorian Hawkmoon, at the beginning of the book, goes on an adventure with Count Brass, the name of the last book from the Castle of Brass trilogy, and then also is from some of his fellow friends that also adventured all together prior to the Battle of Londra. So that's basically what's happening in the first 4 or 5 pages. First 4 or 5 chapters rather of the first book of this series. Now what's happening is that Count Brass is back for good, which we found out about, but now he's back for good. Is that time was changed, and now at the Battle of Londra, Isilda has disappeared. She has died, and so that was the first book started 5 years after the Battle of Londra, and now the next book is set 2 years after that. So basically, what's been happening for the last 2 years is that Dorian Hawkmoon has not been taking his wife and their 2 children's death to the time travel change well. He believes that she's still alive, and so he's trying to find out for her. So he's become less and less powerful. He's become obsessed with recreating the Battle of Londra. He had a local metalsmith make these metal soldiers that represent the signs of the evil empire of Grand Britain and the good guys of the Camargue and their allies and so forth. And he does various battle scenarios trying to find out what actually happened and so forth with his wife, Isilda, who died in the Battle of Londra, which did not happen in his timeline. So he's become obsessed with this. He's not working out. He's not working out. He's not checking himself. He's not eating well, right, and so forth. And over the last couple of years, he becomes a caricature of himself. And then Count Brass leaves the Castle Brass to go back to Londra, the capital of Grand Breton, to talk to Duchess Flana, who is a good person who was put in charge of the duchy after they won the battle. for you folks in order to visit her and so forth. He invites Dorian Hawkmoon with him, hoping that he'll come and will use this as a chance to get recuperated and stuff. He doesn't, but now he's in charge of Council Brass. A visitor, a female middle-aged woman named Katinka Van Beck, visits and she tells him about a raid on the eastern edges in the Bulgar Mountains near her kingdom of Ukraine, and tells him about that. It happened. She's a big name in the fighter in the world. Her and Count Brass fought on many sides as mercenaries together before Count Brass founded his nation in the Camargue. So they have reached out to those sorts of things. So she's coming to visit him and so forth and let him know what's happening, and Dorian Hawkmoon's now in charge. What she tells him is that the nature of the attacking Navy army that took her out, that she's the last survivor from the Bulgars and Ukraine, are these various creatures that each look independently from each other, like chaos creatures and so forth, that have come to attack. Nobody knows where they came from or where they're at now, and those sorts of things. So a big raid has happened. So Hawkmoon decides to set out with her because he believes that this is where Ysilda can be found, and so forth, and he still has that obsession. So the two of them set out. So that's what's happening to start the central conflict then of this novel for you folks. Anyway, so I like this novel. I'm giving this probably like a 7.5. It's not as good as the first 4, but it's fine. It's well written. It's fast. I knocked it out in 3 days. The first day, since it's 159 pages, but starts on page 10, it's really 149 pages long. So I said I'll read 50 pages each day. The first book, he writes his books in 3 books. The first book ended after 60 pages, so I just knocked it out. And then the next one started at 73 because there's a couple of pages, obviously, in between one book ending and the beginning of the next one with the title pages and so forth. So it started on 73, and then it finished 51 pages later. So the first book I knocked out in about an hour and 25 minutes. The second one in about an hour and 8 minutes. And then the last book was just like 37 pages, and I knocked it out in less than an hour and about 40 minutes. So it was probably if you add all those together, it's around 3 hours. Roughly, you could easily knock it out in one day. He's a very fast reader. His novels that have been published are very, very fast. You can knock them out very, very quickly. It's fun stuff. One of the reasons, again, the channel is named The Worst Thing About New Books, a quote by a French philosopher, Jacques Joubert, who said that the worst thing about new books was that they kept us from reading the old ones. And so this is an old novel that was published decades ago. Right, and these are sort of things we should be reading about. This series and this author in particular are heavily influential on modern fantasy. You can't read modern fantasy without it. This is where the start of the law versus chaos archetype began, and it's a big part of it. You'll see it later on in Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber, or the Louise Cooper trilogy that we looked at. I went back and reread and so forth. And you saw this heavily in 60s and 70s stuff later on. For example, in a Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game that got started in the 70s, its first, before it had its advanced edition, just its first edition of the basic Dungeons & Dragons, began only with a law versus chaos as its central conflict. And it didn't add good and evil on top of that until the advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Just as an example of how the law versus chaos dynamic is very, very big. Also, another part of that is that in the 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide that set in a appendix, and Gary Gygax, the co-founder, says that Michael Moorcock and the Eternal Champion series are one of the key influences on where he got a lot of his ideas from that game from. Also, there are some key characters like Elric of Anonymity from this series, or his sword Stormbringer, which are key parts of pulp culture and sort of crossed over and so forth, and are key aspects from his era. So he's heavily influential, and again, he created the idea of the multiverse. They named the multiverse and so forth, so you can't read multiverses with parallel worlds and all these sorts of things, and all these different and decentral conflicts that are happening without reading, Michael Moorcock. It was heavily influential on fantasy for you folks. So there you are. That's one of the reasons why we're doing a deep dive into them. So there you are. Have you read this book, Champion of Garathorm? If so, what did you think about it? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Did you agree or disagree with my 7.5 out of 10? If so, let's talk about that too. If you want to talk about the spoilers or the ending, let's do that too. If you enjoyed this, why not hit that subscribe button, because there's going to be a lot more of these to follow. And then finally, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it in watching my video, because we all have so many things that are happening in our lives, and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have an amazing day.